Long-haul truckers are no strangers to strange tales from the road, stories whispered at truck stops, exchanged over static-filled CB radios, or passed down as cautionary legends. But some stories refuse to fade into mere folklore. They cling to the edges of reality, as unnerving and persistent as a shadow in the rearview mirror. For Dave Big Rig Harrison, trucking had always been a way of life. A second-generation driver, he was used to the monotony of endless highways and the occasional oddity, the wayward deer, the inexplicable lights in the sky. But nothing could prepare him for the night he encountered the phantom hitchhiker of Route 66. It was a chilly November night when Dave pulled his 18-wheeler onto the deserted stretch of Route 66. The highway, once bustling, now lay in eerie silence, forgotten in favor of newer interstates. His destination was Amarillo, Texas, where a shipment of auto parts awaited delivery. He was making good time, the hum of his diesel engine the only sound breaking the vast stillness. Around midnight, the road dipped into a long, lonely valley. The moon hung low, casting its pale light over the crumbling asphalt. That's when he saw her, a lone figure standing by the roadside, her thumb jutting out in the universal plea for a ride. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with long, dark hair and a tattered white dress that fluttered in the cold wind. Dave hesitated. Picking up hitchhikers was against company policy, and for good reason. But there was something about her, something fragile and desperate. Against his better judgment, he slowed the truck to a halt and rolled down the passenger window. "Need a lift?" he called out. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable in the dim light. She climbed into the cab, her movements stiff and deliberate. Dave noticed her bare feet pale and dirty as she settled into the seat beside him. "Where you headed?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She turned to him, her eyes dark and unnervingly blank. "Just up the road," she said softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried an odd, echoing quality that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Dave nodded and pulled back onto the highway. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She didn't smell of sweat or road grime like most hitchhikers. Instead, there was a faint metallic tang in the air, like rust or old blood. For several miles, the woman remained silent, staring out the window. Dave tried to make small talk, but her responses were terse, almost mechanical. "Where you coming from?" he asked. "Nowhere." "Family waiting for you?" "No one waits for me." Her answers sent a chill down his spine. He decided to focus on the road, gripping the wheel tighter than usual. The CB radio crackled to life, breaking the uneasy silence. "Breaker, breaker, Big Rig, you out there?" came the familiar voice of his buddy, Tony, who was hauling a load a few miles behind him. "Yeah, Tony, I'm here," Dave replied, grateful for the distraction. "You see that storm brewing up ahead? Looks nasty." Dave glanced at the horizon. Sure enough, dark clouds loomed, their edges flickering with distant lightning. "Yeah, I see it. Might have to pull over if it gets bad." As he spoke, he noticed the woman shift in her seat, her gaze now fixed intently on him. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak, but no sound came out. They drove on in tense silence, the storm drawing closer with each passing mile. The first raindrops splattered against the windshield, and the wind began to howl. Dave's nerves were frayed, his unease growing with each glance at his peculiar passenger. Then, as they approached an old rusted bridge spanning a narrow creek, the woman spoke. "This is my stop," she said abruptly. Dave frowned. There was nothing around but trees and darkness. "You sure? There's nothing out here." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for the ride." Relieved to be rid of her, Dave pulled the truck to a stop. The woman opened the door and stepped out into the pouring rain. She stood there for a moment, staring at him through the open window, her dark hair plastered to her face. "Be careful on this road," she said, her voice low and chilling. "Not everyone who travels it makes it to the other side." And then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows without so much as a backward glance. Dave sat there for a moment, shaken. He reached over to close the passenger door, but as he did, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The seat where she had been sitting was completely dry, untouched by the rain that had soaked her moments before. He slammed the door shut and hit the gas, eager to put as much distance between himself and that bridge as possible. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windshield and lightning illuminating the desolate road. His CB radio crackled again. "Big Rig, you okay?" Tony's voice came through, tense and concerned. "You just disappeared off my radar." "I'm fine," Dave replied, though his voice trembled. "Just weird night." "Tell me about it. You see anyone out there?" Dave hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Couple miles back, thought I saw someone on the side of the road. Young woman in a white dress. Gave me the creeps." Dave's heart skipped a beat. He gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Tony, I picked her up." Silence crackled over the radio. Finally, Tony spoke, his voice barely audible. "Dave, that's not possible. That girl, she's been dead for years." The story spilled out in fragments like a broken transmission. According to local legend, the woman was a hitchhiker who had been killed on that very stretch of Route 66 decades ago. She'd been struck by a truck while trying to cross the old bridge during a storm. Since then, drivers had reported seeing her apparition, always seeking a ride, always vanishing before reaching her destination. Dave didn't want to believe it, but as he glanced at the passenger seat again, his chest tightened. There, faint but unmistakable, was a single wet footprint, smeared across the otherwise dry fabric. He drove the rest of the way to Amarillo without stopping, his mind racing with questions he could never answer. To this day, he avoids Route 66 whenever he can. And when other truckers ask him why, he simply shakes his head and says, "Some roads are better left untraveled." Jake was a long-haul trucker, known for his unflinching demeanor and an endless supply of coffee in his cab. He loved the solitude of the open road, the long stretches of highway under a blanket of stars, and the hypnotic rhythm of tires against asphalt. But there was one stretch of road he avoided at all costs, Route 89 near mile marker 145. Every trucker who had driven past that marker had a story, and none of them ended well. One cold November night, Jake was forced to take Route 89. A snowstorm had closed his usual route, and his dispatcher insisted he deliver a load of medical supplies to a remote hospital by dawn. The alternative? Miss the deadline and lose his bonus. Reluctantly, Jake agreed. As he approached Route 89, a sense of unease settled over him. The highway was eerily quiet, the storm clouds obscuring the moon. The air seemed heavier, colder. He cranked up the heat in his cab and turned on the radio, hoping to drown out his nerves. Static filled the speakers. He switched stations, more static. Frustrated, he turned the radio off, leaving only the hum of his engine and the crunch of snow beneath his tires. When Jake saw the sign for mile marker 145 looming in the distance, his stomach churned. The tales he'd heard flooded back. Truckers seeing phantom hitchhikers, strange figures appearing in their rearview mirrors, engines dying without explanation. Most chilling was the legend of the Shadow Man, a figure said to stalk the road near the marker. Jake dismissed the stories as truck stop gossip, but tonight, they felt all too real. As he neared the marker, his headlights illuminated something in the road, a figure standing perfectly still. Jake slammed on the brakes, his tires skidding on the icy pavement. His truck came to a stop just feet away from the figure. A man dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face obscured by shadows. Jake rolled down his window slightly, cold air rushing in. "Hey, you need help?" The man didn't move. Jake's breath hitched as he noticed the man's shoes didn't sink into the snow. They hovered just above it. Suddenly the figure vanished. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. Jake rubbed his eyes, convincing himself it was a trick of the light or his imagination. Shaking off the unease, he pressed the gas and continued down the road. A few miles later, Jake noticed the temperature in his cab plummet, despite the heater blasting on high. His breath fogged in the cab, and a faint whispering sound tickled his ears. H glanced in his mirrors, expecting to see the shadowy figure again, but the road behind him was empty. Then he heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the passenger seat. Jake froze, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Slowly, he turned his head. The passenger seat, which had been empty, now held a small, antique music box. Its lid was open, and a haunting melody played, the sound delicate yet chilling. Jake swore under his breath and grabbed the music box, tossing it out the window. The moment it hit the road, the melody stopped and the cold dissipated. Relieved, he refocused on driving, chalking the experience up to stress and fatigue. But his relief was short-lived. A mile down the road, the whispers returned, louder this time. Words formed within the noise, garbled but insistent. "Turn around, leave." The lights on Jake's dashboard flickered, and his truck shuddered violently. He pulled over, heart pounding. The engine sputtered and died. Jake sat in silence, the whispers growing deafening. He reached for his phone, only to find it wouldn't turn on. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it faint cries, voices pleading, screaming, laughing maniacally. Jake grabbed his flashlight and climbed out of the cab, the snow crunching beneath his boots. He opened the hood, hoping to find a loose wire or some other easy fix. But everything seemed normal. A soft glow caught his attention. Turning his flashlight toward the source, he saw the music box sitting in the snow by his front tire, its lid open, the melody playing again. His blood ran cold. "No way, I threw you out." Suddenly the box snapped shut, and the whispers stopped. The silence was worse. Jake turned toward his truck, only to see the shadowy figure from before sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. "Get out of my truck!" Jake shouted, his voice shaky. The figure turned its head slowly, revealing a face that was featureless, just smooth, pale skin. Jake stumbled backward, tripping over the music box. When he hit the ground, the figure vanished, and the truck's headlights flared to life. Scrambling to his feet, Jake climbed back into the cab, slamming the door shut. The engine roared to life without him touching the ignition. His GPS screen blinked erratically before displaying a single word: run. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He threw the truck into gear and sped down the road, ignoring the icy conditions. The music box's melody played faintly, despite the box being nowhere in sight. As he passed mile marker 145, Jake glanced in his rearview mirror. The shadowy figure stood in the middle of the road, watching him, its featureless face tilted slightly, as if amused. The road ahead twisted and turned, the snowstorm intensifying, but Jake didn't slow down. Finally, he saw the lights of a truck stop in the distance, a beacon of safety. He pulled into the parking lot and stumbled out of his truck, his legs shaky. Inside, the warm air and hum of conversation were a welcome contrast to the nightmare he'd just endured. Jake approached the counter, where a weathered man with a name tag reading Earl stood. "Rough night?" Earl asked, pouring Jake a cup of coffee. "You have no idea," Jake muttered. "What do you know about mile marker 145? Earl's expression darkened. "That stretch? Been cursed for years. They say a man was killed there in the 50s, a trucker who picked up the wrong hitchhiker. Ever since, strange things happen. Most don't make it past the marker." Jake's hand trembled as he sipped his coffee. "I saw him, or something." Earl nodded grimly. "You're lucky to be here, son. Not everyone makes it out." Jake didn't respond. Outside, his truck sat idling, the faint melody of the music box drifting through the night. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that whatever haunted mile marker 145 hadn't let go of him. He spent hours in the truck stop, drinking coffee and listening to other truckers' tales of the highway. Earl's warning rang in his ears, echoed by every story of disappearances, inexplicable breakdowns, and sightings of the Shadow Man. Yet no story he heard involved a music box like the one that haunted him. It seemed personal. At sunrise, Jake decided to move on. He didn't want to sit idle any longer. The thought of being a sitting duck for whatever force lurked on Route 89 made him uneasy. He stepped outside, the frosty air biting at his face. His truck looked normal, though he half expected to find the music box waiting on the seat. Reluctantly, he climbed back into the cab. The cab was empty. Jake exhaled a shaky breath of relief. He started the engine, the familiar rumble calming his nerves. Yet as he pulled out of the lot, his GPS flickered again. It displayed his route, but a red line snaked backward toward mile marker 145. "Not a chance," Jake muttered, resetting the device. But no matter what he did, the route recalibrated, forcing him back toward the cursed stretch of road. He reached for his phone to call dispatch, only to find it dead. His charger, which had worked perfectly the day before, didn't seem to be working now. Frustration boiled over, but Jake was determined to stick to his planned route. For the first hour, the road was uneventful. Snowdrifts sparkled under the rising sun, and the hum of the engine kept him steady. But then the whispers returned. At first they were faint, like the wind teasing his ears. Gradually they grew louder, more insistent. "Jake! Jake! Come back!" The whispers seemed to echo from the sleeper cab behind him. He dared a glance in the rearview mirror, and his heart nearly stopped. The music box was there, sitting on the small table in his sleeper, its lid slowly creaking open. "No!" Jake hissed, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. I threw you out. The haunting melody began again, its notes winding into his skull like a drill. Jake reached back, grabbing blindly for the box. His fingers brushed against its cold surface, and the whispers crescendoed into deafening screams. "Leave me alone!" Jake roared, yanking the box forward and flinging it out the passenger side window. The melody stopped, and the whispers faded. For a brief moment, silence returned. But then his truck's engine roared unnaturally loud, the dashboard lights flaring like strobes. The GPS recalibrated once more, showing an ominous message: "You can't escape." Jake's heart raced as the truck jerked violently, as if something had taken control. It veered onto an off-ramp, heading back toward Route 89 despite Jake's attempts to steer it away. "No, no, no," he shouted, slamming on the brakes. The pedal didn't respond. As the truck sped back toward mile marker 145, the world outside seemed to shift. The snowstorm intensified, but the snowflakes fell in slow motion, defying gravity. The trees lining the road twisted unnaturally, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. When the truck reached the marker, it came to an abrupt stop. The sudden jolt threw Jake forward, slamming him against the steering wheel. Dazed, he looked up to see the shadow man standing in front of the truck. This time, the figure wasn't alone. Shadowy shapes emerged from the trees, dozens of them, all featureless and translucent. They surrounded the truck, their whispers merging into a symphony of madness. Jake locked the doors and fumbled for his CB radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Jake Barnes, Route 89, mile marker 145. I need help." Static crackled, followed by a distorted voice. "No one escapes." The cab filled with an oppressive cold, frost creeping across the windows. Jake's breath formed clouds as he frantically scanned his surroundings. The music box reappeared on the dashboard, its melody now warped and discordant. The shadow man approached the driver's side window, his faceless head tilting as if studying Jake. Suddenly, the glass shattered inward, and an invisible force yanked Jake from his seat. He screamed as he was dragged out onto the icy road. The shadow man loomed over him, reaching out with an elongated arm. Jake scrambled backward, his hands slipping on the slick pavement. "Please," he begged, his voice trembling. "I just want to leave." The shadow man paused, his featureless face tilting again. For a moment the whispers quieted. Then in a voice like grinding metal he spoke, "You've seen too much." The shadowy shapes closed in, their icy hands gripping Jake's arms and legs. He thrashed, but their strength was inhuman. They dragged him toward the tree line where darkness pulsed like a living thing. Jake's screams echoed into the void, swallowed by the unnatural forest. The truck sat idling at mile marker 145, its headlights cutting through the snow. By morning, it was empty, its driver nowhere to be found. Dale Clarkson had been driving long-haul routes for over 15 years. He had seen every stretch of asphalt, encountered every quirky diner, and heard every urban legend the road could conjure. But nothing could have prepared him for the nightmare that awaited him on Black Hollow Highway. It was a moonless night, and the faint glow of his truck's dashboard was the only light guiding him through the desolate stretch of highway. Black Hollow was infamous among truckers. Stories of ghostly figures, vanishing vehicles, and eerie whispers in the wind were common. Dale had always dismissed them as campfire tales designed to spook rookies. The night was unusually quiet, save for the hum of his engine and the rhythmic sound of the tires on the cracked pavement. He was hauling a refrigerated trailer filled with frozen goods, and the weight of his load made every bump in the road more pronounced. As the clock struck midnight, the CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker, breaker, this is Deadeye. Anyone out there on Black Hollow tonight?" Dale smirked and picked up the mic. "This is Roadrunner. I'm on Black Hollow. What's your 20, Deadeye?" "I'm about 10 miles ahead of you," came the reply, the voice tinged with static. "Keep your eyes peeled, brother. Strange things happen out here after dark." Dale chuckled. "You don't really buy into those ghost stories, do you?" Grew serious. "Laugh all you want, Roadrunner, but this place ain't right. Saw something tonight that'll keep me off this stretch for good." Before Dale could press for details, the radio went silent. A shadow in the road, an hour passed, and Dale found himself fighting off fatigue. He reached for his thermos, taking a swig of lukewarm coffee when he spotted something in the distance. A figure stood in the middle of the road. Slamming on the brakes, Dale's rig screeched to a halt mere feet from the person. Heart pounding, he leaned out of the window. "You okay, buddy? You trying to get yourself killed?" The figure didn't respond. It was a man, pale and thin, dressed in a tattered flannel shirt and jeans. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his posture was unnerving, rigid, and unnatural. "Hey!" Dale shouted. But the man remained still. Uneasy, Dale grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the cab. The cold night air bit at his skin as he approached. "Look, if you need help, I can." The man turned his head sharply, revealing hollow, blackened eyes that seemed to absorb the light. Dale froze, a chill crawling up his spine. The man opened his mouth, but instead of words, a low, guttural moan escaped. Dale stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. When he looked up, the man was gone. Heart racing, Dale scrambled back into his truck, locked the doors, and floored the gas pedal. The hitchhiker a few miles down the road, Dale tried to shake the encounter from his mind. Maybe fatigue was playing tricks on him, or maybe he'd just seen some drunk wanderer. He turned on the radio, hoping for some distraction, but all he got was static. Frustrated, he reached to turn it off when a voice broke through. "Need a ride?" Dale's hand froze. The voice was raspy and unfamiliar. "Who is this?" he demanded, his grip tightening on the wheel. The voice didn't answer, but laughter echoed through the static, a hollow, menacing sound that sent shivers down his spine. Suddenly, the truck's interior lights flickered, and the temperature plummeted. Dale's breath fogged in the air. He glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. A figure sat in the passenger seat of the cab. It was the man from the road, his blackened eyes staring at Dale through the mirror. Panicking, Dale swerved the truck, nearly running off the road. When he looked again, the seat was empty. The abandoned truck stop, Dale decided he needed to stop and collect himself. Up ahead, a dimly lit sign for a truck stop came into view. He pulled into the gravel lot, relieved to see a few other rigs parked there. The place looked old and run down, but it was better than nothing. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the empty diner. A woman stood behind the counter, her face pale and expressionless. "Coffee?" she asked in a monotone voice. "Yeah, sure," Dale replied, trying to steady his nerves. As she poured the coffee, Dale glanced around. The other truckers in the diner were eerily still, their heads bowed over their meals. The air felt heavy, oppressive. "What's with them?" Dale asked, nodding toward the others. The woman didn't answer. When he looked back at her, her face had changed. Her eyes were black, just like the man's on the road. Dale bolted for the door, spilling the coffee as he ran. Outside, the other trucks were gone. His rig was the only one in the lot, its engine idling softly. The final stretch back on the road, Dale's fear turned to desperation. He just wanted to get off Black Hollow Highway. But the road seemed endless, looping into itself no matter how far he drove. The clock on his dashboard blinked erratically, the numbers making no sense. 3:47 turned to 11:59, then to 6:66. The CB radio crackled again. "You can't leave," the raspy voice whispered. "Shut up!" Dale shouted, yanking the CB mic out of its socket. Lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Another truck was barreling toward him at high speed, its headlights blinding. Dale honked his horn, swerving to the side, but the truck didn't slow down. Instead, it passed through his rig like a ghost, vanishing into the darkness ahead. The endless nightmare as dawn approached. Dale saw a sign up ahead. "Welcome to Black Hollow Highway." Confused, he realized he'd come full circle, though he hadn't made any turns. His fuel gauge was nearly empty, and exhaustion clawed at him. Desperate, he pulled over and got out of the cab. The highway was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, just an oppressive stillness. Dale spotted something on the ground, a wallet. Picking it up, he opened it to find a driver's license. The photo was of the man he'd seen on the road. The name read, Dale Clarkson. Heart pounding, he turned back to his truck, but it was gone. The highway around him faded into darkness, and the whispers began, low guttural voices calling his name. Dale screamed, but no sound came out. Epilogue. Weeks later, another trucker named Sam pulled into a diner far from Black Hollow Highway. He sat at the counter, sipping his coffee, when an old-timer struck up a conversation. "Ever hear of Black Hollow Highway?" the old man asked. Sam nodded. "Yeah, heard some spooky stories. Why?" The old man leaned in, his voice a whisper. "They say the road claims souls. Last guy to disappear out there was named Dale Clarkson. Been missing for weeks. Funny thing is, some truckers still hear his voice on the CB radio, calling for help. Sam shuddered and took another sip of coffee, vowing never to set foot on Black Hollow Highway. But as he left the diner and climbed into his rig, his CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker, breaker, this is Roadrunner. Can anyone hear me?" Sam froze, staring at his CB radio. The voice was faint but unmistakably desperate. "This is Roadrunner," it repeated. "Can anyone hear me? I'm stuck. I can't get out." Sam hesitated, then picked up the mic. "This is Big Bear. Who is this?" There was a long silence, then the voice returned, trembling with fear. "I don't know where I am. The highway just keeps going. There's no way out." Sam's pulse quickened. He had heard the tales of truckers trapped in loops of endless asphalt, doomed to drive forever on cursed roads. He glanced at the GPS on his dashboard, its screen flickering. "Where are you calling from?" Sam asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping over him. "Black Hollow Highway," the voice replied. "Please, help me." Sam's blood ran cold. He knew better than to respond, but the distress in the voice pulled at him. "You're not messing with me, are you?" "No, I'm not." The voice cracked, filled with panic. "I think I'm dead. I saw something in the mirror. It's me. But it's not me." Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel as he considered his options. He knew one thing for certain. Black Hollow Highway was no ordinary stretch of road. It wasn't a place you went unless you were ready to risk everything. A grim encounter the next day. Sam found himself at a truck stop just a few hundred miles from Black Hollow. Though he had resolved to avoid the cursed road, curiosity gnawed at him. He sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee as he listened to the conversations around him. "You hear about the guy stuck on Black Hollow?" a trucker said to his companion. "Roadrunner, they call him. People keep picking up his calls on the CB, but no one can ever find him." "I heard the same," the other trucker replied. "They say the highway only shows itself to certain drivers, the ones it wants to trap. Once you're on it, there's no getting off." Sam decided to press his luck. "You guys know if there's a way to help someone stuck out there?" The truckers exchanged uneasy glances. "You can't help someone who's already claimed," one of them said grimly. "Best you can do is stay far away and hope it doesn't come for you next." Sam paid for his meal and walked back to his truck, the weight of their words hanging over him. As he climbed into the cab, his radio crackled again. "Big Bear. This is Roadrunner. Are you still out there?" Sam's jaw tightened. Against his better judgment, he picked up the mic. "Yeah, I'm here. Where are you now?" "I don't know," Roadrunner replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "The road keeps changing. One minute it's familiar, the next it's like it's alive. I saw my truck in the ditch earlier, smashed to hell, but I'm still driving." Sam's heart sank. He didn't know what to say. "You're not going to find your way out," Sam said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "If the stories are true, that road's got you for good." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Roadrunner spoke again, his voice calm and resigned. "Thanks for trying, Big Bear. If you ever see Black Hollow, don't stop. Don't look back." The radio went silent, and no matter how much Sam called out, there was no reply. The temptation of Black Hollow weeks turned into months, and Sam couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. He avoided any routes that brought him near Black Hollow, but it was as if the road was calling to him. His dreams were haunted by the sound of Roadrunner's voice, the endless loop of asphalt, and shadowy figures lurking in the darkness. One night, while hauling a load through a remote stretch of countryside, Sam saw a sign that made his blood run cold. Black Hollow Highway, 2 miles ahead. The rational part of him screamed to turn around, but something else, curiosity, guilt, or perhaps something darker, compelled him forward. When he reached the highway, it looked like any other road. But as soon as his tires touched the asphalt, the air grew heavier, and the temperature dropped. The CB radio crackled to life. "Big Bear. Is that you?" Sam's hands shook as he grabbed the mic. "Roadrunner? I thought you were gone." "I never left," the voice replied, filled with a sorrow that chilled Sam to the bone. "Neither will you." The headlights of an oncoming truck appeared in the distance. Sam honked his horn, but the vehicle didn't swerve. Instead, it passed through him, leaving a cold, tingling sensation in its wake. The road twisted and turned, the surroundings becoming more surreal with each passing mile. Trees with skeletal branches seemed to reach out for him, and the moon hung unnaturally low in the sky. Sam knew he had made a grave mistake, but it was too late. The highway had claimed him. The legend lives on to this day. Truckers on Black Hollow Highway report strange occurrences, phantom rigs barreling through the fog, eerie voices on the CB, and glimpses of drivers who vanished years ago. Some say they've heard Big Bear's voice on the radio, warning others to stay away. Others claim to have seen Roadrunner's rig, its lights flickering as it disappears into the night. But one thing is certain: Black Hollow Highway is no ordinary stretch of road. It's a trap, a cursed place that feeds on the lost and weary, and once it has you, there's no escape. So if you're ever out there and you hear a voice calling for help, think twice before you answer. Because on Black Hollow Highway, no good deed goes unpunished.